Mycket mer, den är mycket mer fylld, så lite teologiskt och lite mer specificerad vissa.
Jag känner ju alldeles mycket så jag tycker
Vissa saker är mer specificerade enklare. Vi har några ledare som är förordningar.
Oh ja!
Vad hände?
Elen är tillbaka.
Oj.
Men...
Oj, det var lite en eldsvåda.
Det här kanske funkar inte så bra.
Det var något annat kanske.
Ja, precis. Eller strunt i den överhuvudtaget. Men kolla... Hej!
Det går ju säkert direkt så att någonting måste faktiskt...
Precis, den här börjar flamma upp. Så vi använder inte den här. Men tror du kan återuppliva elen igen?
Prova en laddare i taget nu, så att, för det kan ju vara någon laddare.
Ja, precis.
Jag tror det var den som var fel.
Ja.
Men nu har det proppat igen.
Ja, jag ska sätta in nu.
Okej. Ja, men jag tror det inte. Kom in klockan.
Jag tror att det uttalet där fungerar, men det är bara
Ja.
kan dra förlängning.
Den här vita förlängningssladden, den börjar brinna. Så att det var den som var fel.
Den var farligt.
Ja. Så vi använder inte den.
Jag har en annan förlängningssladd som räcker dit bort, tror jag.
Jag tycker inte vi tar någon förlängningssladd, om jag ska vara ärlig. Det funkade väldigt bra innan. Eller, det var en liten skärm, men bättre än inget. Egentligen så kan vi strunta i den och bara köra högtalare. Och så sätter vi den här på en liten piedestal.
Men jag tror det ska funka.
Ja, men jag orkar inte. Helt ärligt. Ja. Nej men det blir för klart. Så när elen funkar så stoppar vi in högtalarna. Och så kör vi på det. Så bebisstol. Check.
Ja, det är många som... Det är många av oss som... Jag vill ju absolut inte bo på landet. Men man kan absolut... Det vore nog bra, för det är många som längtar. Som har liksom allting på. Så länge har vi ja, det var nog jag och min man då.
Yes.
Ja, eller du menar, det är några som ska de typ sommar.
Så ska vi se här.
Ute på landet. Ja, mannen är
Hello Hugh. I'm sorry, I can't hear you. Wait a second.
Eller det blir svårt. Det går kanske.
Ljud ut. Hörlurar. Alright, can you speak again?
Yeah.
Yay! Yeah. We hear you. It's going through. It does.
Good.
Yes.
Let's...
Alright. So, I think you can see most of us here. This is the team.
Oh, right, that's you. Are you going to translate this, Michael, or is it going to be direct English?
No.
Do you need translation?
No, just lay on a really thick British accent so they understand you properly. No, but we're fine, right?
Yeah.
Yeah? We're all fine. We're good. So, yeah, I've made a brief introduction of you. And you can tell me if it's correct. I said that you're one of the leaders of the Jesus Army, or the Jesus Fellowship Church, and you have lived in community for 40 years.
Yeah.
Something like that,
Yeah,
because you're an old man.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Young
And
in spirit, I hope. Anyway.
yeah. And I might also add, the things you do, you overlook the training year program.
Yeah, that's right.
Which I, for example, am going to attend, and also the Multiply
That's
ministry.
right. The connections with overseas churches and churches that are linked to us from the UK as well, really. We are connected with other churches outside of Jesus Fellowship. So, yeah.
Yeah. And then also the undivided celibacy.
Yeah, celibacy.
ministry.
I'm single for the Lord, and I have some responsibility for looking after those who are celibates in the church and single who have a vision to live for Jesus undividedly. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So, oh, I hope nothing happened now. Yeah, the screen just froze. But we're good. We're good. All right. So yeah, you have free hands. Say whatever you want for half an hour, and then we'll have a Q&A after that.
Right.
All right. Thank you. Bless you.
Okay, bless you. Bless you. Well, thanks for inviting me to come and speak to you. I appreciate that. This is a first for me. I've never done a Skype conference before, and so I'll do my best to speak in my British accent so you can all understand me. But if you don't, please shout out and say you don't understand. Okay, just interrupt. Feel free to interrupt. I think I'm qualified to speak about community because I've made all the mistakes, and we've got it wrong many times over these 40 years. So I think that's my main qualification, having lived out a shared lifestyle for those years. We haven't always got it right. So one of the great things to me about community is that we experiment. Okay, we do explore. It's an adventure. It's not something that is straightforward. It's something that you have to find the way of the Spirit in. When we first, as a church, experienced the baptism of the Spirit, this is going back 45 years now, when there was the charismatic movement moving through the UK, certainly, and other places, we experienced a small group within this Baptist church in the middle of the UK. There was a great hunger, there was a great desire to find more. You know, we weren't satisfied with the sort of church life we had, you know, Sundays, and then you might have a midweek meeting, but what happened in between? There was no real connection together, and I think there was a desire, when you read through the Acts of the Apostles and what the early church was like, there was a desire for something more. There was a hunger, an ache, a real search. I mean, a lot of us were searchers. I was just a student then, but I was searching. I was an idealist. I had a real vision for a society that was just, a society that was equal, a society that was true. I wasn't, I'd only been a Christian a very short time, but that idealism was driving me towards real community life. And I thought, where can I find justice? I experienced real injustice at times. You know, I can remember I had a job once. I worked in a factory that was reconditioning ammunition boxes for the Ministry of Defence. It was a really strange job when I was a student. And there were a group of Asian women in this factory who were very, very badly treated by the guy. He was an awful guy, really, and he treated them. I was so angry at the inequality I found. And that was one example of many ways in which, you know, society to me was corrupt. Society was wrong. And I was looking for something different. I was looking for an alternative. And when I came to this church, what happened was that the leader and a group of people, it's a small group of people, were filled with the Holy Spirit. And from that time, things changed. That power, like a Pentecostal experience, really, of power, moved the people into creating a new society, a new way of living. And what was going on in that first stage was there were healings happening in the chapel. There was a chapel that people were part of. There were healings that were happening there. There were people getting delivered and saved. There were people that were coming along and hearing that something new was happening. We were getting rid of some of the old clutter to do with traditional church, the pews, the old organ and the pulpit. They got cleared out. And we wanted it to be a place where people could come and be together. That was in some ways the first stage. We were filled with what you might call the intensity of the Spirit, the intensity of God. And I think what was going on was that God was separating and gathering. I think God always does that. He separates out and gathers together. And night after night after night in this chapel, people were just coming along from without publicity, without advertising it. People would turn up, they would spend the evening together. And they didn't want to go home again at the end because something new was happening. God was moving. There was real movement happening. And people wanted to stay together. They didn't want to go back to their own homes. And, you know, every night of the week, there would be things going on. And I think what the next stage after that was that we thought, well, if we want to stay together, why don't we do something about that? Why don't we begin to live together as they did in the early church? And I think we found that it was all very new for us. How do we explore a shared living together? And we found that at first it was probably smaller houses. People opened their houses up. They had a spare room or two. They invited people to come to live with them like extended families. They began to explore a shared lifestyle. And then we discovered that there was obviously in the towns, there was the need to reach out to people. And so we developed what we call welcome houses in towns where people would come and they would stay for a while. People who had been on drugs, people who were homeless, people who were quite needy. And they would come into these welcome houses with a special team in there who could look after them and who would be able to help them forward in terms of training and discipleship. And then we could filter them through to our community houses. And only then, after that point, did we move to larger community houses. And we began to buy some bigger properties within this village area, within the Midlands of the UK. And we began to find that the big thing for us was discovering relationships, relational power. It wasn't just the power of God moving in signs and wonders. And we saw those in baptism in the Spirit, in release, in tongues, in worship. There was power in that, but there was power in relationships. That was one of the big things. And I know for myself, what I was finding was that I was learning to be vulnerable. And that was completely new to me, to be open in my heart towards people. I was a reserved person, British reserve. Okay, you don't talk about things deeply. And I was finding that God was breaking me open with this new power of love in the Spirit. And I think vulnerability was very important to us in establishing real community. We had to find an ability to trust, to share those things behind the mask. A lot of us live with masks with a front, with a false front, a nice religious front sometimes. And God was breaking through those. God was breaking down barriers. We had hippies would come along. We had bikers, Hell's Angels turned up. We had students. We had ordinary working people. We had a great variety. And the only way that was going to work was the love of God breaking through barriers. We had to come out of our territorial areas into a real love community. But it meant being ready to let go of that mask, let go of that falseness, let go of that barrier, break through that barrier and say, look, we are one in Jesus. We are one in that Spirit. We are not divided. Now, that's not easy because we have images, we have training, we are particular people who are the product of our conditioning. So that didn't come easy, but it was so good to be able to confess your sins to one another, as it says in James. It was so good to be able to let out those things that you've never talked to anybody about. You've never really been able to share those things. They'd always been secrets. And actually to share those things and be accepted was something very, very, very precious. I mean, to me, the first time I can remember I spoke to somebody about an area in my life I'd never spoken to anyone before. It was a frightening experience because you fear rejection, you fear that people aren't going to understand. But actually, it was a very releasing experience. It was a very healing experience for me to know that you were trusted, you were accepted, you were understood. And I think that to me was a big step forward into building relationships, true, deep relationships, beginning to open up to one another, because we were baptized into this one body together, and we had to work it through together in terms of how we created a structure. And I suppose over time, we had to develop a sort of suitable wineskin to hold this new wine. You know, we had to work out how were we going to do community. And I can remember the very first experience living in this big house. We had one big teapot. We used to put all the money in at the end of the week and take out what you needed, you know, according to your needs. It was all very spontaneous and informal. But in times we had to develop that, and we had to create structures that meant that we were accountability in our finances. Because, you see, money was a big thing. To have a real common purse community was very radical in any society, you know, not just in the Western society, but in any society. We saw mammon as a real power that had to be defeated. And the only way I think you defeat mammon is by sharing it, is by justice, is by equality. Because mammon is such a stronghold, certainly in our society. You know, Jesus talks about you can either worship God or you worship mammon. It's a spiritual power. And I think we found that, you know, that common purse community as Jesus practiced and as the New Testament church practiced, and I think Paul in his apostolic teams practiced as well. Common purse equality sharing meant that power of money, power of materialism, power of consumerism, which is so strong in our society, that power was broken. We didn't want to be dominated, as so many churches are dominated, by the power of the world. And that spirit of the world, that spirit of consumerism that comes in. And we began to declutter our lives. We began to live more simply. We began to buy things in bulk. We began to simplify our lifestyles. We began to share our clothes. We began to share not just the material things, but we began to share our lives. The two are both important. You can't, I think, have real spiritual community without practical community of sharing things. And so we learned to do that. We learned to say that these things belong to the corporate. They don't just belong to me personally. Whether that's my gifts, whether that's my possessions, whatever it is, it's a corporate thing. It's a people thing. And we wanted people to come and see that it was possible. I never thought it was possible to find justice in this world. That was me as a teenager. I never thought that society could be any different. I longed for it to be different, but I could never see it happening until I saw it worked out amongst these people. And it was very much a, you can campaign at times for justice. You can campaign for righteousness. You can campaign for these things as an individual. But I think a demonstration of it as a people is so much more powerful when you see it being lived out, as in the early church. And that's why, day by day, people were gathered to this, people were attracted, and people could see that this was a church not just on Sunday, not just on a midweek Bible study, but this was a 24/7 church. People were there all the time. People were available. There was an openness. There was a daily living out of that hope, that reality. And to us, we were dealing with what I call social salvation. Peter says on the day of Pentecost, save yourselves from a crooked generation. Save yourselves from a crooked generation. Come out from a society that is corrupt. Create a new alternative society. Create a society where Jesus is at the center, where the Spirit is moving, where there is true justice and righteousness and equality, where there is a real respect for one another, where barriers are broken down, where love rules. And, that was the call that I heard when I came to the church, and which I still live through now. A social, not just a personal salvation. Yes, you need to be personally saved by Jesus, but it's a social thing. Come out from a corrupt society and create a new alternative society. Come out from something that is decaying and is in a sense finished with in terms of what God can do, but create something that is new, that is radical, that is totally different. And, I was reading somewhere the other day a quote that really challenged me. It says that every radical movement of God ultimately fails on the test of love. every radical movement of God ultimately fails on the test of love. And, that to us is still a challenge today. We want to keep something of that radical edge. And it's harder as time goes on because you become more set, you become more settled, you become more institutional if you're not careful. And that was one of the dangers that we saw, that you can become inward looking, you can become into routines, you can become too secure, too comfortable. And we need that challenge of the Spirit to live in radical love again, to rediscover our roots, to rediscover what really it was that birthed us, and to ensure that we do live out the reality of love in our lives, that vulnerability, that commitment together to work it through, that power of the cross that breaks through barriers, that unites us. People are so different. The cross that is spoken of by Paul in Ephesians, that brings peace between the warring peoples. And I believe, that we want to see radical community expressed in these ways, more and more in our society, because people are looking for community. People are disillusioned with a corrupt society. People are fed up with consumerism in some ways. People are seeing through that. But what is the alternative? And I believe we've got to demonstrate an alternative. We've got to show that it is possible to live unselfishly, to live with a vision, because community is not an end in itself. It's for a purpose. It's a purpose to demonstrate God in the fullness amongst his people. It's to show that he is the Lord and he is creating something new that is of his heart. Because, community starts with God, the Trinity, the Father, Son, Holy Spirit. They're in a perfect community. They're in a perfect flow of love, of oneness. The 3 in 1, the 1 in 3. That's the foundation of real community. And we want to demonstrate God through community to this world. So I think then began to discover was that out of this, that we wanted to create businesses, and we have our own businesses where we can employ largely our own people, because we wanted community at work, if you like. We wanted to see community as a place where people could work together as well as live together, where they could be discipled at work, where we could employ people who wouldn't otherwise have a job. And in some of our businesses, we are able to have this entry-level type work, where people who have been unemployed, people who have been addicts, people who have been in all sorts of awful situations, really, are able to begin to find some self-value again through work. And so to us, our businesses, which started very small, we had a farm, we had a little shop in the local town, which was Northampton, and it began to develop. We had a number of retail units. We went into Whole Foods, and we began to develop a building industry. The first building that we had was in a dilapidated state and it needed work on it. We found there was somebody who was a plumber, somebody who was an electrician, someone who was a bricklayer, and they got together as a team to refurbish this place. And out of that, a building team was formed, and then a building merchant to support that. So it grew bit by bit by bit, so that now our businesses make profits of £500,000 a year, and are really very important to what we're doing as a church. We want to see those businesses as an extension of our life. Now, obviously, over time, proportionally, fewer and fewer people live in community in our church. At one stage, it was 80%. Now it's nearer 20%, because as we've grown, we've realised that there will be probably less buy-in over time. So we've had to adjust and are still in the process of adjusting to that. But that sort of community core is very important to the future and the beating heart of the church. And, we have our own garage now that services our cars and our vehicles. We have our own, what we call our food distribution centre. Michael will tell you about that. He's visited it. where we buy in bulk stuff and redistribute it to the community houses. And now we have something like, I think, 40 main bigger community houses and 20 smaller community houses. So spread throughout the UK. So it has been a slow, steady process of just growth, adapting, and sensing where is the Spirit leading us. It's been an adventure, because we started off, we didn't have a clue where we were going or what we were doing. And we've realised, as we've looked into this, that there is a long history of community that goes back right to the beginning. It's a bit like a thin red line of shared community living right from the start. And they've often been persecuted and experienced some persecution during phases in our life when there was opposition from the world, but from our brethren in the churches. That was the hardest thing, when you sensed that there was opposition to us, because it was radical, it was different, it was challenging, it was a very controversial way of living. And that was a painful time, but we realised that is always going to be the case when you're doing something radical for God. You're going to get opposed. And so we had to accept that. That was part of our vision, really. And, we want to be that city on a hill that shines out. It's not just a person. It's not one person who can be a city on the hill. It's a people together who are the city on the hill. And I would just say that keep exploring community in your own context. Keep exploring what it means to be radical for Jesus, what it means to be sacrificial for Jesus, what it means to be together in vulnerable, open, hearty relationships. Paul speaks about the Thessalonians, I think it is. He says, we shared the gospel with you, but we shared our own lives. And that, to me, is what's so important. It isn't just about doing a religious thing. It's about lives together in a cause, in a vision. And we've had to adapt and change, and we're facing this at the moment with a newer generation coming up taking over. How are they going to take community forward? They can do it a bit differently. They've got new ideas, new expressions, and we've got to be able to work with that in a partnership, because it's not going to be exactly the same as we did it. It's going to be something fresh, something different. And we're exploring that at the moment. That's the phase at this stage as a church. So I would say keep exploring the vision of community. What's going to work? Start small. Find a oneness of heart and vision, and see how that needs a wineskin shape to hold it, how that is actually going to be worked through. But to me, I've lived community for 40 years. I wouldn't want to live any other way. If I knew there was a better way of loving God and loving my brethren, I would do it. But I don't know of a better way of doing it. It's painful. It exposes your heart. It brings out the worst side of you that gets uncovered. You think you're a nice, tolerant, patient person, but when you live with others, you realise there's a very nasty side of you that comes out. But that's got to be taken away at the cross. You've got to learn forgiveness. You've got to learn brokenness. You've got to learn humility. And there's no better place to learn it, I've found, than in community. So I think it's an antidote to a very individualistic society that we live in. Certainly here in the UK, individualism, consumerism, materialism rule. And I think we're showing something in a complete opposite way. Corporate peoplehood who together can show and demonstrate so much more than just a group of individuals. So that one heart and soul, which is the vision that the early church had, to us is very precious. To really work out a oneness of heart and soul as a people, as a group, from many different backgrounds, many different types. Your closest friends would be those who are totally different from you. That's what I found, and that's been very precious. That's of God. And the Bible is full of community when you look into it. You've got the Jubilee in the Old Testament, where slaves were released after this period of 49, 50 years. Slaves were released, debts were removed, land was returned to the people that it belonged to. There was an equality established. And God's heart, and you'll see this throughout the Bible, is for a people who will express himself upon this earth. And that's why community is so important to me. It's that expression of peoplehood, of God in a people, of people who have come out and who have gathered for his glory. But we want to reach out to all people. You see, community and mission go together. This is my last point, okay, and then we'll open up for questions. Community and mission go together. Community is a gathering, but in order that we can be released into society to show, to demonstrate, but to gather further those who are broken, searching, and who are looking for something else. And, you know, our heart is to show kingdom justice, kingdom reality, kingdom love to a very broken world. Anyway, there's a lot more I can say, but please feel able to throw back at me anything you want to, okay? Don't mind what it is. Any sort of questions, comments, or anything you'd like to find out. I'm very happy to talk about it, to do community.
You heard him.
Can you tell a little bit more about the common purse and like the economic
sure.
part?
We find that actually sharing our money is very important. And what we do is that we put all our money into a common fund. Okay, it's properly administered. There is clear accountability and accounting to do with that. And then we take out of that fund whatever we need for our weekly needs or whatever. So if someone was coming to join us, we would say, look, come and test this thing out for a year. We wouldn't want you to come straight into the common purse. We want you to know that there is a call of God in your life to live sacrificially like that, because it's a very radical way of living. But common purse, as I said to you, is, I think, very important because otherwise your community can be based on other things as well that won't ultimately work. When you begin to conquer possessionism, that is a real challenge. But to me, it's how Jesus lived. He had his common purse. It's how the New Testament lived after the power of Pentecost. And I think it's how the Apostle Paul lived with his teens. They were generous. They lived equally. How else can we show equality unless we share our possessions and we share our money and we have a common fund? That demonstrates to me the life of Jesus. There's a lot more practical things that I could say, but I think Michael might be able to illuminate you about that as well afterwards. But it's a key thing for us. It's a challenge, but to me, it's the heart of God.
But you who share this common purse, do you live like in the same house, or do you? Yeah, that's because.
Yeah, I mean, most of us will live in the same house, but there are other people who live in their own house who can still share in that common purse.
Okay.
So it does work that way as well. Yeah. Again, I think you've got to find what works for you in your situation. Some people have tried to take the model of what we do and take it elsewhere. It doesn't always work because I think every context is different. Every social context is different. And your society is a bit different. And we would say, what is God saying to you about how you should operate community in your situation? It'll be not the same as our situation. But it needs to be radical, it needs to be of the Spirit, and it needs to be something that is challenging.
Another question? Ja, absolut.
Hey, I have a question. Could you say if there's any way to nourish an environment where Christians and people can show their brokenness.
Can you just explain that a little bit?
Well, to me, the places where I tend to be, they tend to be. There's no place for people to show that they are broken, because it might.
Yeah.
I think they might feel that they won't be met or. Trust. Yeah.
I understand. Yeah, that's good. That's a good question. It comes back, I think, to what I said about really having a vulnerable heart. You know, we realise that the kingdom of God is made up of those who are poor in spirit. You know, you read through the Beatitudes in Matthew chapter 5. Those who are broken, those who mourn, those who grieve, those who hunger and thirst, and that is the people that God is particularly working amongst and gathering together. And we say, look, there is a place for the broken, the humble, the poor. Jesus had a heart for the poor. We have a heart for the poor, and we've wanted to demonstrate and show that the gospel to the poor is where Jesus was at, and we want to follow that. Jesus was the broken man. Jesus was the humble man, and unless Jesus was completely poor, he could never identify with the vast majority of people in this world. You know, it's a very small percentage who are rich in this world. We're lucky in the West, but if you look at the whole world, Jesus identifies with the vast majority of people. Now, we need to demonstrate that in our shared lifestyle, that all are welcome, but especially the people who know their need, the people who are poor in spirit. Poor in spirit, they recognize they've got a great need of God, a great need of something more. They're not self-sufficient people. Of such is the kingdom of God. And so, I'm not sure if I fully answered your point, but I do believe that brokenness, that vulnerability, that weakness, that need is so essential to the kingdom of God and the people who find that kingdom of God. They come with humble hearts.
Do you have specific practices that you do to kind of make this possible during a week or during a year, or something very concrete?
Sorry, I missed the first part.
If you have any practices, concrete practices that help foster that kind of environment.
The concrete practices that foster an environment of brokenness, of weakness. Yeah. I think one of the things that we've been working on recently is what we call our Jesus centres. I didn't talk about these, but over the last 10 years, we've been exploring these Jesus centres, which are larger places in the middle of a town or city. We took over a cinema in Northampton, an old cinema, and we turned it into a Jesus centre. And what that is, it's a place where people can, it's open to everyone. It's not for Christians. It's open for everyone in the local town, particularly. A place where they can, a sort of drop-in place, a place where they can find help practically, where they can have showers, where they can be fed, where they can do IT classes. We have asylum seekers learning English and being helped with how to cope in our society. And it's a worship place as well. It's where we worship on Sundays and have little groups, spiritual groups throughout the week there. So it's a place of outreach, it's a place of social action, and it's a place where we... Oops. Are you okay? Can you still hear me?
Yeah, we're okay.
Yep.
Okay, good. Sorry, I thought I'd lost you there for a moment. So these Jesus centres have become very important to us as part of this vision of reaching out to people And they attract, as I say, they attract our asylum seekers, they attract the homeless, they attract the poor, where we can serve them and help them. But they also attract all sorts of other people as well. And we have classes and we have groups who are part of that as well. So it's very, very open, and it's, in some sense, I suppose, the first step into the kingdom, the first showing of kingdom love, in a very practical way, often. So that is to us one of the ways in which that does get worked out.
Yes, Josh?
Yeah. Hello.
Hi.
Yeah, I'm just curious. You have different community houses, it sounds like, from what, if I understand correctly. And maybe they're smaller households. And do they each, are they all different? And do they follow a weekly rhythm together? I'm also curious about like in each household, does everyone work the same amount of time outside the community? Or is there a commitment to working a limit, a certain limit outside the community? That sort of thing. How do you structure work outside the community?
No, it's a good question. Yeah, very good question. I think we do have a program, but it's becoming more and more. One of the things we've been learning is to develop a more and more flexible program and give each community house more and more opportunity of developing what they think is important to focus on in their house. Because we carry the same sort of spirit in our houses, but there will be different emphases. There will be different focuses. Some houses are more discipleship focused. Some are more mission focused. Some might be even more prayer focused. So there will be different emphases, but there will be a sort of a common core of real value. I think it's common values that we share together. We do say that we have a special agape meal once a week on Tuesday, and we do have Sunday worship times. Beyond that, there is a program, but it's a flexible program increasingly. We do expect everybody to work where they can. Not everybody can, and we do. A lot of our folk will be working within our kingdom businesses, but by no means all. And we've got to make sure that there is a balance kept between life, work, and ministry. And that's something that we've had to look into again recently. We don't want people to be burning themselves out, overworking, for example, in our businesses without fulfilling their ministry. You know, we want people who've got a real outreach evangelistic ministry to be released to be able to do that. So we've got to be flexible. We've got to take each case, you know, in a sense, within a broader wineskin. There is a lot of opportunity exploring different ways of expressing that. You know, there is one smaller community house in a place called Milton Keynes, which lives amongst an estate in the middle of a quite difficult estate. Quite deliberate that people went there with that vision. And they work a lot amongst the estate, and they have a much more flexible approach. You know, they do daily. They will be, you know, playing football with the local kids, handing out parcels to people who are poor. They will be integrated into that local community. They'll be going on to community meetings. That's quite a specific ministry, but the people in that house gather together because they have that vision. And we want to release people. And one of the things that's very important to us is to release people with a vision. If you've got a vision to do that, we want to empower you. We want to enable you to do it. We don't want you to be held back by a sort of institutional structure. That's the challenge we face. You know, many years ago, a word came to us along the lines of it starts with a man, it becomes a movement, then it becomes a machine, then it becomes a monument. Man, movement, machine, monument. Now, we don't want to get to that stage of becoming a monument. You know, like in this country, over the years, there have been some amazing movements of God. You had the Quakers, you had the Methodist revival, you had the Salvation Army, the Pentecostals. But some of these, they lost their momentum. They became machine and finally monument. And we see the danger of that. So we're having to rediscover the fresh roots of what really created who we are. And that means really going back to those roots and realizing that the roots are founded in Holy Spirit baptism, a shared life, and a real commitment together to a vision. But that can be expressed and worked out in different ways. There isn't just one size fits all. And that's important. So it's a good question. I hope I've answered that one.
Yeah, thank you.
A final question? Come on. You got the chance now. Oh.
So we had a nun here yesterday. I don't know if you know that. We had a nun here, and she spoke quite a bit about discipline and obedience. And I wonder how that would be in your setting. How do you work with that?
Yeah. I think all of that has got to be built around. We do have a disciplined lifestyle here, and we do believe in discipleship, in training people to get the best out of them, really. But I think it's all got to be built on relationships. I think where real discipline and obedience works, it's built on true open relationships. I mean, I'm coming back to my relational power thing. Without that, I think you're in danger of creating something that is religious, but isn't really a spiritual movement. Now, I'm not knocking any sort of religious community at all, because I think people have their own calling. But I would say that in my experience, it only really works where there is a relationship of trust and mutual accountability. When you do have that, I think you can find genuine discipline and genuine growth through that training, because it is important. But I think it's got to be built on something where there is respect, there is openness, there is a commitment to one another, rather than just imposed. I think if you impose it from above, there are dangers in that, as we found ourselves. Because I think at one stage in the early parts of our history, we were much more rigid in that sense. And there are dangers in that. We had to readjust, and we still are readjusting to something that has got to be rooted in love and the Spirit.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Hugh.
Okay, well, thank you for listening to me.
Yeah.
It's been a great audience, and appreciate the questions. Great. Sorry, one more question.
Oh, okay, one final question. One
more.
Sorry.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi, David here. I had the privilege of coming over to visit you about 15 years ago.
Oh, right.
I'm very thankful for that. This one might take a bit of thinking there, but if you think back like 15 years, could you try to sum up like the major points? What has changed? What has been added on? What has been dropped? What has been changed?
Wow. Okay, thanks. There's a lot I could say there, but I think we've obviously, as I said, we've become and are becoming more flexible. We're becoming more open to new forms of community, new expressions of community, which we're in the early stages of now. We've obviously developed our Jesus Centre, that element of our outreach and mission. Those have happened in the last 15 years. And I think we're looking at a whole range of issues of looking at restructuring things within the church, of finding some fresh grassroots initiatives. I think we're trusting more grassroots initiatives. We were one time more top-down as a church, but we want to encourage things from the bottom up. And as I said a bit earlier, I think that empowering initiatives from people themselves, you know, what I was saying about this little group living on an estate, those sort of initiatives, we want to encourage and empower more and more. So that's another change in development. And we're seeing the need to listen to a newer generation who will do it a bit differently and work with them as they take things forward. So there is change. Change is going on. We're in that process, and it's a necessary part of staying as a movement.
All right.
Okay, right.
Thank you again.
Thank you, Michael. And thank you all for all listening. I appreciate it. And
Yeah, big
have a great
applause.
rest of the day.
Yeah, you know the movie I made when I visited you? Yeah, I'm gonna show it to them later.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
So and then I will publish it on the internet. Have you watched the video or the version I sent you?
Yeah, I've watched
Yeah.
that. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not the final version, though, is it?
Exactly. So now it's complete.
You'll put it on the internet and we can see the final
Yeah,
version.
yeah, exactly,
It's more
exactly.
it's technical. Yeah, okay.
Yeah. And I'm looking forward to August. Thank
Yeah,
you.
it'd be great to have you.
Thank you
Yeah.
for taking your time, and God bless you.
Bless you.
All right. Bye bye.
Bye then.
Det gick ju bra. Ja.